Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's Common Ground. I'm Malva Kajali, Special Projects Associate here at the Rail, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming our friends from Mildred's Lane, an artist residence, radical experiment in living, a growing, breathing museum, a place to act out allegories of labor and kinship while sharing in bonfires and dinners with strangers and friends, perhaps strangers who become friends, located deep in the Pennsylvania woods. I'm honored to be welcoming Ambassador of Entanglement, Morgan Puett, alongside artists Mark Dion and David Brooks, curator and cultural historian Alastair Gordon, writer Barbara Bourland, and keeping them in conversation and in questions will be the lovely interlocutor Thyrza Nichols Goodeve. We're also so lucky to have the poet Patrycja Humienik here with us today, who will read for us to close today's programs. We've started out all of our events here with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger-Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. And it's worth taking a moment, I feel, to remember that the heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all those who struggle for freedom, in recognition that when it comes to our liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation. That thought coming from the lovely Angela Davis. And in that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions. I'll post in just a moment. But now it's my honor to welcome our wonderful host, Officer of Complexity at Mildred's Lane, Thyrza Nichols Goodeve, moonlights in the rest of her life as a writer, editor, artist, and interviewer, who writes with rather than on contemporary art and artists. Her interests are many and range across art as a structure of feeling, human and non-human animal ontologies, and the aesthetics of wonder. She's also interested in the interview as essay, surrealist methodologies, and the metaphysics of tech. She is the original purveyor of what it means to be in fellowship and generous community with all, a conversational detective of the highest order, and she was senior art editor at The Rail from 2017 to 2019. She currently serves as an editor at large. And Thyrza, take it away.
Well, wonderful. Malvika, what a wonderful introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be here. And I just have to give a shout out to Malvika, who named me a conversation detective. And I love that. I can't wait to make a business card. Anyway, welcome. I am here in Mildred's Lane. I am in the library with a skeleton, an owl, many books. This gives you a sense of the environment. So let me tell you a little bit about how I want you to think about Mildred's Lane, because partly what we're doing today is to introduce you to it because it's unique. It's not just an artist's residency. It is an art installation, and therefore it's also a social environment. And that's extremely important to know, because when you come here, you are part of an organism. You are not here to just be by yourself and make your art. So Morgan will develop more the ideas of work styles and comportment, all these wonderful philosophical terms that she's given us to think about really the way that we are always in relationship with one another, right? And that if we're here, even if we're here to make our own art, you know, somebody has to take out the compost and somebody has to be aware of who sets the table and all of those things. So it's remarkable. There are various topics that take place, and I will send you to the website and to anything in the chat that will you'll get a lot of information today, so you can kind of go back through and see it. So how did I come involved in this? I mean, I had known Morgan since the 80s, had met her through a friend, but we were at dinner once at Morbid Anatomy Cabinet magazine, and she was talking about Mildred's Lane, and she said, you know, you really should come. And I was like, well, what would I do? And she was like, well, you know, we have these different topics. And she said, one of the topics is country in the city. And I said, you know, I don't know about this, but I just saw this documentary about Man Ray. And in the documentary, and by the way, everybody, Man Ray speaks like Groucho Marx, and I don't think this is well known. He talks about his oiks. you've got to watch it. It changes everything. And in it, he talked about like around 1912, 1913, that he was at a artist colony in New Jersey, and that was actually where he met Duchamp. And I thought, Morgan, I don't know anything about it, but I'd love to do some research and come down and talk about it. So this is also the casual way that topics become part of Mildred's Lane. I went down, I was, felt like I had not prepared enough and didn't have a formal presentation, and sort of sat on a stool in the barn and went through my notebook talking about Man Ray, New Jersey. And it ended up becoming this wonderful essay. I ended up writing about artist colonies and Mildred's Lane and Man Ray and all of these things. So talk about a generative moment, right? Fantastic. And so that's partly what happens here. And I know Alastair will talk more, and everybody will talk more about how much of it is these extraordinary, just casual conversations you have around various themes with each other. But I just want to let you know you should come here. You will work, you will make, you will chat, you will learn, you will be part of nature. So without further discussion, let me turn it over to Alastair, and also the biographies are in the chat of everybody if you want to know more about them. But Alastair Gordon, who will take over now. So why don't you speak?
Thank you so much. To jam my impressions of Mildred's Lane into 8 minutes is going to be a huge challenge, Olympian challenge, but I like everything you said. And I think everybody has a highly personal response to this experience when you go there. And seeing those images, aerial images of really how wild it is. You're only like 2 hours from New York, and you really feel like you're deep in wilderness. And I think I don't think you can underestimate the importance of that in this experience. It's really, I always, whenever I drive up the long half mile driveway, this tortured, terrible, winding, muddy, rocky thing that challenges the suspension of our cars every time we go up there. I always think of Thoreau's line about "in wildness is the preservation of the world." And that to me hangs over this place as a kind of a motto, because it is extremely, loose and spontaneous. The interactions you have there are some of the best I've ever had anywhere, and they really supersede so much that we learn at art school or in the museum, art gallery culture, or certainly in academia, a thing I think that academia maybe used to have, but no longer seems to have because of just the whole nature of the structure. And Morgan and other fellows and other supporters of Mildred's Lane have
Oh, we seem to have lost him for just a moment, but how fun, because we can guess where he might go. Morgan, do you want to take it away?
Well, it's touching the way he describes the lane into Mildred's Lane, because it truly is hazardous. It makes it a little difficult to get to. But I guess overall, I just want to start describing as Mildred's Lane and make sure you don't understand it as an artist residency, or even an art park like the static sculpture in the field, because there are dozens and dozens of projects and events that are ongoing. And then it gets quiet in the winter and very introspective, but then in the spring, summer, and fall, it's really vibrant with people coming and going all the time. And then we organize what we call sessions. And I guess I'll back up just a tinch. I'm sorry, I'm going ahead of myself. Mark and I bought this property with friends back in 1997, and immediately fell in love with the landscape. And it was really mostly about how delicately we could intervene with what was there already, which was this incredible, almost 300-year-old settlement of little buildings and structures But even beyond that, the whole area was full of 6,000 years of history of the Lenape, the Delaware Valley tribes, and all these other indigenous people. So it was just recently, and the whole trans-historical aspect of it, that we found these old crusty little buildings. And this is this vernacular architecture that I am obsessed with and have been obsessed with since childhood. So immediately we started working with what was there as a site-sensitive landscape and discrete interventions. But then all of our friends immediately started convening there, which immediately I started realizing the trouble with how to have people in this rustic place that at that time had no water, had no facilities, had just had an old outhouse. And then over time, we slowly developed all of these projects and installations within the projects, but not about static living, static sites, but about living, working, researching. And each project you can sleep in, you can live in, so overall the whole site kind of co-evolved with all of our friends, countless people and friends who can't be named in this little ditty here, but co-evolved into this new contemporary art complexity, as I refer to it. I call it a complexity because even complex doesn't get there, it's active. And that really embodies real critical questions that relate to how we relate to the environment. That's first and foremost, and sustainability. And also how we relate to each other, learning how to be better with each other. And also really the most important thing, I guess they're all important, systems of labor. It's a no service industry there. So it's how we maintain the place. And next, I guess it's forms of dwelling, finding our creature comforts. How do we deal with comfort in a rustic place like this? And many of the installations touch on that. Also just sometimes clothing apparatuses, and then most importantly, creative domesticating, just domesticating, that being the overall thread. So in a sense, it became a way to unfurl the whole history of women's work. And in this, it's a very feminist project because each year we had to reinvent the way to do it again, just try to get it a little bit better, to get it right. So that then emerged this more philosophical musings around what I call work styles. Work styles embodies all of these things, the environment, the relationships to each other, systems of labor, forms of dwelling, creative domesticating. And that is kind of an ethics of comportment, our behaviors on the planet. And so we're constantly addressing this, reassembling the terms, whimsically, rigorously at the same time. And everybody contributes and is involved. Everybody participates in that. So it's really social and it's really political. I say being is the practice.
Is this a good moment for Mark to join in? And you can, since both of you started it, maybe Mark, you can take off from Morgan and add your story.
Sure. I think that, when Morgan and I first began to think about this, we had this experience of lots of our friends, artists, visiting and thinking about this landscape and these structures as a sort of opportunity to do something. So you really can't be in that environment without being inspired to imagine how you can contribute something, how you can add something. And so this was going on quite a bit. And we began to think, how do you formalize that? At the same time, as people who are fairly engaged in arts education and also went to art school in what I would kind of say is the Wild West period of art schools, we saw that arts education in an institutional way, as kind of Alastair was saying, was becoming extremely constrained, right? The art schools were being more and more professionalized. There was a lot of overbearing influence of administrators and lawyers, and certainly for Morgan and I and many of our peers, the things that we did with our teachers during our art school periods weren't things that would just get you fired. They'd probably get you put in jail today. So, there are some of those, some of that kind of deep connection between artists and practicing artists and students. There was a great deal of fostering and mentoring that just wasn't happening. Not that I'm in any way condoning some of the excesses of that and some of the really problematic behaviors of that, but nevertheless, we just kind of threw all of those kind of relationships out when we began to police that in a way. And so I think one of the things that Morgan and I were really interested in is creating a situation in which we could have more established practitioners, not just artists, but people from other fields, poets, architects, landscape architects, social historians, just kind of general geniuses like Alastair come and share their knowledge, but also, create a situation in which people could be introduced to the culture of being an artist or the culture of being a critical thinker. We very much looked at and thought about things, like Mountain College or the Hans Hofmann School, or a variety of these kinds of experimental sites where a great deal of what artists gained came from that experience of living together, of dancing together, of having fun and carousing and creating this extremely non-hierarchical way of exchange that again was just something we were seeing the kibosh put on that in art schools. At the same time, for me, that those moments in school were really the things that convinced me that this was the world I wanted to live in. I don't really care about how I learned to print a photograph or make a lithograph or prime a canvas. Those things are totally irrelevant. But what I did learn is that maybe the culture of being an artist is a little bit different from the culture of being a dentist or an engineer. And that's just not something you can learn in art school in the same way today. So we wanted to create a space that created these kinds of exchanges and also really emphasized the personal bonds between artists and across disciplines. And again, that what I get out of art school is a group of incredible friends, people like Jason Simon and Moira Davey and Greg Bordowitz, who are the people who, I still, whenever I make a work, I think about making the work for them, and who I know, these people who I know have my back and I will always have their back. And that's a really hard thing to get out of art school today. So we wanted to make a place where maybe you could get that from spending time here at Mildred's Lane.
Okay, that's a terrific place, I think, to return to Alastair, because Alastair, you've been coming to Mildred's Lane for what, 20 years? Oh, there he is again. We'll admit him and I'll ask again. Seems to be off.
I'm letting him in right now.
Hi, Alastair, are you with us?
Yes, he is.
Yes. Hi, Alastair. I think we will return to you, and I just wanted you to tell us, you started to come to Mildred's Lane as far, what, 20 years ago? Is he still not there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay, now we can hear. Yeah, talk about how long you've been and whatever.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, you. Yes.
When was I cut off? I'm sorry, I just got a new.
You had just been talking about the way into the road and the nature.
Yeah, I think almost from the beginning. I wrote a piece in the New York Times in 2008 trying to figure it out and explain it. Of course, I couldn't, but it, and I've spent the last 12 years, I think, trying to explain it. And I think that's what's so good about it. It's not about sort of a linear, rational way of being. And this community is, so I tried to look at, I'd done up 10 years research on alternative communities, especially in the 60s and 70s. And the most famous one, called Drop City, was a group of artists who'd gotten together in 1965, and they fell apart very quickly. But a group of them went off to a much more isolated place in Colorado and started something called Libre, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary. And the components there that worked, and are very similar to Mildred's Lane, were that it was deep in the country, deep in wilderness, and it was very hard to get there for outsiders. And the other thing was that they had bare minimum, but they did have a set of rules and a kind of almost a tribal council. So if some really wild, violent character entered the community, they could be sort of voted off the mountain. And I think that combination is what saved it. And it's the closest thing I came up with, in terms of, finding a comparison. There's a bit of Black Mountain, obviously, there, and other groups, but I think it's totally, in my experience anyway, completely unique, in terms of cultural history. My first impression was still the same. Every time I go up that driveway, I get the same sense of excitement mixed with kind of a little bit of dread. Is my car going to, make it up the driveway? But it's always excitement with knowing that you're going to discover something that you may not otherwise get a chance to discover at a more conventional kind of venue.
One of the things that might be helpful is you've also participated in many of the different themes, to give people a sense of what are the themes that you have experienced. And then we'll move on to David Brooks.
The themes, to me, the theme that, and I was starting to say this, I think, before I got cut off, is this theme of wildness, but with a certain kind of order. And I think wilderness does apply a necessity for order, just because you got to survive. And I think that's, Morgan has and other long-term Mildred Lane people have developed, the idea of comportment and the idea of work styles that really is it's almost close to frontier survival thinking, which I think is what gives the place such vibrancy and vitality, on a daily basis, because you really are facing the elements, even in the summer when it's nice, there's this sense of, the forest is right there, there are bears in the forest, there are deer, there are a lot of animals. And to me, that's the most important. And I said the last time we were there, when we had a bonfire there, sitting around the fire talking about, I think I asked the question of what's the best conversation you've ever had, to the whole group of people sitting around the fire. And so many of the best conversations we'd all had were there in Mildred's Lane, just with someone you maybe had never met before, and maybe never would have met in another situation, being able to open to almost any kind of new thoughts or ideas that might be gravitating around the group. And I think we need that. And students, I know this because I teach sometimes too, especially art students and architecture and design students, they have no idea how to just get together and have a social interaction that's not cobbled by all kinds of politically correct expectations or fears of what they may say or do. And for just having younger people being allowed to learn how to have a dinner party and sit and have a glass of wine and have a conversation at a table that's beautifully set. I mean, one of the first dinners I remember was these long troughs of moss and these old weird Victorian hat pins, with foods, stuck through the food, and it was like, what is this? I've never seen this. And the refrigerator is landscaped and curated, and unlike most refrigerators that we know. So it's everything becomes special and creatively driven. And that's just an enormous relief. It's not about academic one-upsmanship or political correctness. It's about individual creativity.
Right. So, David Brooks, why don't you talk about how Mildred's Lane has been so much part of your art projects and your development as an artist? And when did you come here?
Yeah, well, I actually came to Mildred's Lane first as I was a student of Mark's, actually, and I guess that would have been 2007. And then I kind of forced my graduate program to form a kind of fund that would help send graduating graduate students to Mildred's Lane for a session, and they're graduating the summer after graduation. So then I went there as a fellow, and so what was really informative or a formative aspect of my own education, but then became rather quickly very formative in how I thought about education, and now being both an artist and a teacher, it still really informs that. So so I was there for I've been there pretty much every summer. There's been somewhere I couldn't be, but sometimes leading a session and sometimes being a part of a session, sometimes a visitor. But I think that one of the things that really began as an important thing for me is that this is a place that you can really pursue a place of research and investigation and an inquiry that takes time. And the act of like living amongst and with other people while trying to pursue a set of research, it needs the time, and it needs that kind of place of care. And so just to kind of demonstrate, like, we had started a project that was first just about how to create a pond. And and you'd think that creating a pond might be, kind of simple. You just kind of dig a hole and let it fill with water. But once one begins to dig into that, pun intended, and begin to research, well, what really makes a pond is and a number of things come to light and come into high relief quickly. So if our kind of aspirations is to create an environment, a place that is also an artwork of sorts, but the one for humans and non-humans alike. And so that begins to expand really quickly, the sets of kind of criteria and the ethics involved. So we had first just kind of gone around the region and really just driving around, looking at ponds, sometimes going onto private property to get a sneak at another pond, happening upon ponds, and really looking at what are the different possibilities of that. A pond really in the end turns out not to just be one little location, but just even the idea of it, one could see as kind of the beginnings of a whole universe. And so, it can encapsulate the way one even begins to ascertain what a universe is. And so first, just simply digging what we call like perk tests and test sites or test holes on the landscape there, which then that also dictates where you even legally can even put a pond, but also where it can sustainably remain and actually continue and develop into what might be called an ecosystem. As we began to push that forward and expand our understandings of both a pond and for humans and non-humans, we realized that we needed a structure in there, but the structure of some sort, or this pond house, would probably be amphibious by nature. And so it's in the water, out of the water. And that notion then kind of led into much bigger understandings of what a pond could be. So then the University of Pennsylvania Landscape Architecture Department took it on for a couple of years as kind of a case study for their students. And that began to unfold a whole other set of kind of concerns around that, because now you're involving another 30 students and young thinkers around it. We began to think about how the energy flows would happen. How do you create even a solar powered or a hydraulically powered kind of battery to be able to aerate the pond? So we began to build prototypes in the landscape. These things are very hands-on, and building a kind of what we'd call sort of a turn, like a water wheel that would power these kinds of things. We then began to expand that understanding and moving it out to like, well, what about all the people that have tended to this place in its past, and how do we begin to fold in all different types of understandings of what ancestors might be? And that began to create a series of drawings and plans for it that was both algorithmic based, but also kind of family tree in a way. And so now the pond is really definitely not looking like what you might understand to be pond. There's the kind of longevity of that, and what happens after all of our lifespans. Like, this thing is going to continue going on. There is really a responsibility to that. There's a kind of ethical thinking around, well, what happens into the future, and so that was also really taken into account. In the end, when it comes time to actually dig in a pond, I mean, it's a massive, like, physical undertaking, and you really have to rely on people that have done that their whole lives. And so when it came time to actually 9 years later to actually dig and build this pond, really what came to the fore was really the wisdom of the pond diggers, and really understanding that, okay, I can see a little moisture over here forming as I'm digging here. I see water coming in over here. And that began to then mutate this algorithmic understanding that really in the end was, our plans were kind of geometric by form and not really possible in that site. And so the pond excavators really are responding to their own intuitions and sets of wisdoms into the landscape. And so all of this kind of thing, I mean, it's kind of, you can see that as like it's a real can of worms as you open it up. But I was thinking about it as that, you know, that the can of worms is actually can be a good thing. I mean, like, you know, we're kind of dealing with a lot of complex things, and life is complicated. And that maybe it's a matter of just articulating the shape of that can and cultivating and fostering the worms, rather than trying to consolidate it into one way of thinking or working. All the while one is doing this, you know, you're also living with all of these people, and it's not my project, it's not just their project, it's everyone's project. And at the same time, it's all the people that are not visibly present, it's all of their projects. And kind of, you know, what happens is Alastair's explained that driveway, the kind of coming into Mildred's Lane, the kind of this, and it seems like it's many miles long, but I guess it's only half a mile long. But it really is this place that where when you come into this this kind of island of sorts, it's I realize what happens for me is like there's a suspension of like the everyday kind of tasks and stresses of my kind of conditioned everyday life. Like that gets suspended for a second, and you're with these people that come there, and there's some kind of all reasons that they're all drawn there, and it really is an emergent thing in that there's not one single plan or an agenda or something that's set out. And so while you're living with all of these people, you're also sometimes you're around a lot of people that you might not normally, for whatever reason, just might not spend the time with in your everyday life of sorts. And so, but you really have to stay with it and work with them in this place and figure out a way that we're all working together in that sense. And so that's such an important element, and was a very, as Mark was mentioning earlier, just this idea that of learning what is the culture of being an artist, because you're not just hanging out with a group of other painters or other printmakers or other photographers. It really is this complex amalgam of different types of disciplines coming together for this one kind of situation. So
yeah, that I think many of the things you just said were fantastic. First of all, the pond as this project that people work on. There are also many shacks, we can talk about this later, that are part of Mildred's Lane. So there's an alchemy shack. There's so these are all part of the projects. And when you were talking about the road, Morgan spoke about, and I think Alastair also, that Morgan, think of the Mildred's Lane more as a portal that you move into. But I'd like us now to sort of, Barbara, will go to you and try to also be specific about, I'll talk a little bit about why I'm here now, but let's have Barbara talk about your experience here and introduce yourselves.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, hi, my name is Barbara Bourland. I'm a novelist. And the first time I came to Mildred's Lane was in the company of Dave Brooks. I was on tour for my second novel, which is about a painter, and David thought it would be a really good place for me to come and do a reading. And my expectations were, I think, minimal. I knew that Morgan had broken her leg and and crawled down the road. And I sort of expected this. I don't know. I thought she would be like really like fit and woodsy, and and she is of course very fit and woodsy. But it was all of it played out in a way that was completely spectacular for me. And every second of it, I've been 3 times now, and the kind of radical domestic agenda that Morgan has for me is a total revelation in terms of being in a place with other people. You know, as writers and artists, we do, as Mark was saying, we love to be with each other. We love to learn from each other, and we make work for each other. But in communal spaces, that can be really complicated. Historically, so much of domestic labor falls to women. And then in larger kind of group settings, like other kinds of residencies, there's often a real financial component to what's happening there, whether it's a fully funded residency with a staff who are employed there year round, or whether it's the kind of residency where, you know, some people contribute a little bit, or other people are funded by their university, and then still other people do work study. And in residencies that have work study, I've really often noticed that it is almost always women. And it's almost always women with children. They work really hard to find this time away from their families, and then they go to wherever it may be, and they still wind up cooking and cleaning, and they don't have the same amount of time to do work that everybody else has. And I think that at Mildred's Lane, the sense of fairness and the sense of devotion to the project, and the ways in which Morgan's ethics of comportment force everyone to think about what they are taking and leaving in the space, how they hold physical space with their bodies. It gives me a sense of comfort with others that I really don't feel in other places, because I feel, you know, to be a writer, to be an artist of any kind, is to have a really active imagination. And that can be good for you, and that can be bad for you. And it means that you're really sensitive to how other people feel. And maybe a lot of the time that sensitivity, you can be completely wrong about what you believe, about what you're seeing in other people's reactions, but you're still feeling it. And at Mildred's Lane, the way in which we choose to so carefully spend time with each other allows me personally to feel really free intellectually and really free creatively. And so I was just there last week as a bibliophant, and I just finished my 3rd book, which comes out next summer, and I worked on it for 4.5 years, really almost 5, a really long time. And I was really careful with it. I really held it close to my chest. And I haven't, obviously it doesn't come out for a year, so I haven't really done any readings of it or anything, but I wanted to kind of pull off the Band-Aid. And I felt, I'm in that possessive place of it. I'll let it go by the time it comes out, but I still feel, I don't know, like it's fragile, even if it's not. And to be able to be in that space and just to try out what it felt like to try to explain it to people and to read from it it sounds so silly, but it's really hard to find a place where that is a comfortable thing to do, because it's not, writers are, you know, we're best at sitting in a room alone. We're not necessarily trained in any formal way to perform in front of other people. And but Mildred's Lane is a place where I feel so comfortable doing that, regardless of who's there. And I think so much of that is due to the space that Mark and Morgan have created over the years, and the way in which Morgan remains and maintains that space for everyone and allows you a way to be a part of it. It's extraordinary.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Since you mentioned the bibliophants, that is the reason I am here. The session is named Bibliophants, and it's really structured around reading, which then becomes an occasion for all of us and people from many different disciplines to start to talk to each other about what reading is for each of us, or and how it changes. And we had a fantastic talk by a 25-year-old named Sam, who gave this gorgeous talk. He had been reading a book on bees, and Morgan comes from a family, generations of beekeepers. Right, you're right. And so he had been reading this book about hives and about bees, and he gave this extraordinary talk that he developed while he was here on the relationship of bees and reading. Oh my God, it was fantastic.
Absolutely out of the blue.
Brilliant. Yeah, and it would just emerge because, we had sort of all been, each of us, my friend Haida Hatri is here as well right now as part of it. And she has done she did this workshop on making unique artist books, but not as precious. I'm an artist, I'm now an artist book maker, but almost as a kind of therapy and expression for all of us. And it was so fantastic because it gave us all permission to take old books that she had brought or what we had. And for instance, I'll just show you the one that I have. It's a beautiful volume, but it's Elizabeth Barrett Browning poems. And frankly, they're kind of awful. And I'm going to just go through, and I have this practice called cartoodling, and I'm just going to go through and do this and add pages and paint in it and do what I want, right? And it's something I've known Haida forever, heard her talk about this, but I've never felt liberated to do it. I've always been too self-conscious. So she gave us permission, and everybody else felt that we were given a gift for a lifetime. And I think that Morgan is also about that, giving us permission, because I think as artists trained in the art world, as Mark was talking about it, there's so much stupid kinds of pressures and hierarchies and ideas that you're not allowed to be given permission to come here and all of a sudden start making artist books that are about your own relationship to it. So that's what Bibliophants is. And as I said before, I was also at the country and the city. So Morgan, I thought the word comportment came up a couple of times, and I think that's important to get across to people. I'll just mention that what I've learned from being here is, and I've not been a gifted housekeeper. I have become one, but I wasn't one. And here at Mildred's Lane, that's what you pay attention to. But as she puts it, it's all about don't leave a trace. So you think about where you are, what you've done, and you think about the person who's going to come into the environment next. So it's not about, being civilized and appropriate and all of that. It's about being kind and generous to each other.
Generosity.
Yeah, it's about
generosity. It's learning how to, everything in this 21st century world and urban society, especially, everything's so much done for us. And it's just this automatic thinking that you think someone's going to come up behind you and fix that or clean that, and is just outrageous what I've learned over the 25, well, actually going back even further, because it's 35 years I've been up here in the northeastern Pennsylvania, moving between New York City and here. And generosity, it's really challenging to just slow down and think about who's coming next, or setting up a situation, a hoosh, an aesthetics that someone else is going to get pleasure from entering into that room or that situation, especially in the kitchen laboratory. And just thinking more socially, like what we're calling it a social sculpture, I guess, in this right now in this talk, but it's really about just taking your creative thinking out of the way that you've been taught, out of your studio, and just spreading it around and collaborating with everything in your life, every aspect of your life. Thingness at Mildred's Lane. Puett, Mark, and I have been collectors, for decades, and so the main house is just full of things, beautiful collections, and what really grew that also was collaborating with a few other friends, namely Jeffrey Jenkins and Rebecca Purcell, with this game we call Collectors Collective. So over the last 2 decades, we've been exchanging each other's collections or collecting for other people's collections, so that the collections are just huge, and they take up a lot of space in the main house, but also you can collaborate with thingness there, and learning how to maintain just the dusting and maintenance of those things, and the art collection in the house it's a lot.
Well, and also people are getting to see the photographs. So yeah, it's not like it's a precious, architectural digest environment. It's obviously very beautiful and you can see it. And that's what's sort of great. It's both casual and comfy. And that's what I love about it. It's all about comfort. But at the same time, it's about taking care of, and again, this idea of leaving no trace and being aware. So I think it's also therapeutic for people who got freaked out by, parents who were weird about cleaning, like my mother was, where there was a right, that kind of thing. So you learn to see it more as this.
Or your relationship to chores, just the daily chores. So we have a deck of cards now based on the set of labors that we've created, that we've mentioned some of these titles. I'm the ambassador of entanglement. We call Peabody, whether he likes it or not, the cabinet minister peregrinator. There's a temporary officer of complexity. Brooks, we haven't come up with exactly a name for you, you creature of the pond world and others. And Alastair, fugitive in archives.
And that was the person who cooks,
choreographer, and people who turns sort of cleaning and dusting. We call that the Ministry of Comfort. So it used to be that we used to have name people's roles throughout the summer, and young artists would come and live with us for days, weeks, months, years at a time, and they would take on a particular role, and that was their role. But it seemed that was kind of still not really working out the problems with labor and on our planet, and who does it, and to be more democratic, creating this kind of card game. Now we've come down to this daily pulling of the labor, and that's you spend 15 to 30 minutes a day doing that thing, and then you can go about your thing. Because then when you have a collective body doing all of that housekeeping and landscape maintenance, then suddenly it's just done really quickly. It's not a chore.
Right. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, say there are people listening to this and they're like, I'd like to go there. What is the process?
Well, a lot of people get really, a lot of my friends even get really offended, like, I haven't been properly invited. And I'm like, it's not about that. I'm not a curator. I'm not setting up a predetermined program every year. It's really actually very emergent, and we kind of make up our minds at the last minute for what's going to happen in the summer. And sometimes things fall away and new things pop up. And then there's a continuum. So there's on the website, there is a kind of entry where you write a letter of interest, and depending on how you want to be there or when, and you kind of have to follow along a little bit on the website, because we do send out, we have a mailing list, and we send out announcements of what's going on and what's going to happen. We do an info zine every year, which kind of loosely describes who's going to be there and what topics we're swarming around. So you gotta follow that and delve into it if you're really curious, and then write a letter of interest. And then if it's a student, we call fellows, then we ask that they go to their institution and ask them to support them to come. Because even though we try to do this really democratically and without, a lot, it's really low economy, we still have to pay for the maintenance. Just right now, the infrastructure is falling apart. So we have a lot of work to do. So the money goes into feeding and maintaining the site. So the sending institutions can support students to come or bring classes. Many institutions bring whole classrooms. Next year, Mary Jane Jacobs bringing students from the School of the Art Institute. Last fall, it was a body from Mecca. So it's ongoing, kind of an open landscape, an open site for engagement.
You also had one that was about Walden.
Yep. Mildred's Lane Renovating Walden. I'm going all over the place. I'm sorry, because I know I don't have much time. But you look at the website and follow the protocol. There's an application process for fellows coming to sessions. And our programming is much more organic. You know, it's like you're coming into a small organization that's collapsed with the ecosystem there. And it's very rough and organic. There's not much formality, except that you have to know it's not always the right fit. You got to be able to rusticate a bit. You can't be, afraid of bugs, and you gotta be able to contribute to the systems of labor, and generously, and like. So that's the way it's very different from the traditional artist residency, where you go and somebody brings their little lunchbox of lunch to your studio and you feel all special. This is where you kind of really have to be a part of the community.
Yeah. Mark, have you have brought classes there, or sort of used Mildred's Lane to teach classes around? Yeah.
Yeah, I brought a lot of people over the years, from back when I was teaching at Yale and when I was teaching at Columbia. And, it is, a big part of the job of bringing people there is to try to build a esprit de corps between them, and to, a lot of the students I work with, they don't really hang out in the same way that I did when I was a student. And partially because they're very professionalized. They're maybe extremely diligent about their individual practices, and so they kind of fail to build those social network that is really an opportunity when you're in school. So when I was teaching at Yale and Columbia and other places, I took this chance to bring people out there. And create that situation which hopefully knits that social fabric. But I think what Morgan was saying is true, that it's not always a good fit with everyone. There are people who they don't want to pull weeds and they don't want to sweep the floor, and there are people who don't know how to sweep the floor, and I always think, and I think, well, that is the case, but what if people at Black Mountain College didn't want to do their time in the garden? That we're not asking people to do anything that we're not doing ourselves. And I think, the way that, Morgan has really, fostered and generated a new discursive method, that physical labor is a big part of the pedagogy, and it's a big part of the breaking down of hierarchical relationships within a group, and even relationships to labor and class. And so, I think it's not symbolic, it's real, but it also does function in the symbolic realm as a way of democratizing everyone. And so, it doesn't matter if you're the bigwig who comes from a wealthy family, you're sweeping the damn floor just like the kid who's really just scraping by to get there, and that is an important lesson. And so I mean that's really I think that Morgan's created this model. It's enormously successful in terms of it's a drag for everybody to do this, but also it's not
that bad. Yeah, taking the compost out just means walking through the garden, right?
Yeah, this is not backbreaking labor.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think it is. It does make your commitment to being there more than
part of it.
As a consumer, that you are an active participant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Malvika had a great idea. There are people who are Mildred's Lane people in the audience.
Oh, great.
So is there anybody who would like to chirp in about your time here? You could just
truly, if you'd like, you
mute
can,
yourself and
well, actually, given the security settings, they actually can't.
okay.
If it feels all right, maybe this is a good moment to transition to Q&A. And
Sure.
if you're a Mildred's Lane friend and comrade in the chat, you can raise your hand proverbially, and I'll pass the mic to you in between questions. How does that sound to everyone? Good? Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Our first, well, thank you all so much. This conversation has really been a house on fire. Our first question comes from the lovely G.E. Schwartz in the audience. And G.E., you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Thank you. I'm not a past resident or anything, but I'm completely taken by this whole project on so many levels. A question either for Mark and for Jay Morgan, or both probably. Can you talk about how stewardship and how it implies a relationship on to duty, and the notion of care tapping into something like the land itself that the place is on, as one does with passion and love?
Well, it's really what we've been trying to describe. The stewardship is shared by everybody who comes there, and when you engage in this commons that I now refer to as a comportment as the commons, you feel a part of it, and you feel a little responsible for it. And if you just take time and generously care for the site while the time, whatever time you're there, even if it's for a day, you feel a belonging. And in that you feel responsible. And we definitely drive forward this thinking about the environment and sustainability, and everything there is, I mean, down to the food, the way we decant food into glass to take it out of its packaging that screams out at you and advertises at you. You know, we don't want to have a kitchen laboratory full of things yelling at us visually. So we take them out of their packaging and put them in glass. We don't use paper products. I mean, outside of toilet paper, we have that, but maybe we'll change that in the future. But we use textiles everywhere. So we recycle this sort of adaptive reuse of textiles in our lives, so that things kind of slowly start from maybe a piece of clothing, but they disintegrate down to a kitchen cloth that's been cut up so that you can wipe up the counters. There are all these little details that are painstakingly developed into a part of the systems of labor that kind of reawaken one to their own habits in the world, and kind of affords them to question how they might do that in their own lives. I mean, we're working at it as a project, but I think it's transformative. From all my friends and colleagues who continue to come there, and new people who just have come there. I mean, one person told me this week that they were only there for a week, but they leave transformed. That's a compliment, because it just it suddenly allows them to experiment. Yes, care is a key term. Love, for me, yes. I'm in love with the place.
Can I add one thing to that, Morgan?
Yeah.
In terms of, answering the question about stewardship, I think it's so much about stewardship to the point where I think you're so close to it, sometimes you don't see it. The way you've dealt with the history of this simple farmland, that's whatever, 90 acres or whatever, with this woman Mildred, and just the way everybody learns about the history of the barns and the outbuildings and Mildred's house. That's a beautiful sense of historic stewardship. So you've got stewardship of the land, which obviously every daily practice has something to do with that. But to sort of bring this woman's history into the present, I think is a beautiful act of stewardship. Yeah.
I should also say that the land is close to 100 acres, and it's divided almost in the center by a creek and a gully, and so one side of that creek is completely untouched. So artists can do projects on our side, and that's where the road is, and that's where the building is, and that's where any future building will happen. But the other side, we really do kind of keep as an important kind of wild place where, that side's for the bears, and that side's for, city folk who want their first experience of getting lost and everything else that can happen on that side. So it's nice to, maintain at least one portion of this as a, oops, I'm in a place where the lights go out automatically. One portion of this as a really, wild place.
Yeah, really, we only exist on about a fifth of the entire piece of land. I mean, you saw the enormous forest that surrounds us. It's about 600 acres of forest around our lot. So, yeah.
One other element is to add to the notion of stewardship, which there's a lot. The stewardship, obviously, as Alastair, you said, it's so much about stewardship. But one really important thing I think that as a first-time visitor would notice is that as you become engaged and invested in whether you're there for a specific session or to visit somebody, or you are a visitor, that sense of belonging remains. And so it kind of opens up that idea of belonging. It makes this notion of inclusivity like really tangible, and that that it's not, as I said, it's not for just one person, it's for everyone, but it's also not for anyone. It's also this place that is its own entity. And so, but you still belong. And so there's a belonging, a sense of belonging that continues with that.
Love that so much. Morgan, sorry, take it away.
Oh, I think I'm just adding, I agree. I'm thanking him for highlighting that. Yes.
I love that. So we got something in the chat I'd love to bring up. Penelope Boyer asks the ever relevant question, have we heard who is Mildred?
Mildred was the incredible old lady that lived there and was our first impact. Our first impact to this site was Mildred, all about Mildred, because what came with the landscape when we bought it was the 65-year-old nephew of Mildred. And he told us these oral histories of, that's the Mildred house. That is now a little archaeology museum. We've been doing an archaeological dig over the years. But anyway, Mildred lived in that house, and she was shacked up with this man named Vincent Miller. So they used to call it the Old Miller Farm. And we felt immediately that that wasn't the proper name because Mildred's essence was still there. She lived there for about 15 or 20 years alone. She did not drive. She walked in and out of the lane, what he says was 4 times a day. She walked out to get groceries. She also, in her aging years, she died when she was about 87, but she cleaned houses. Local neighbors in that area have told us stories about Mildred, and she did drive a tractor, but that wasn't, later on that tractor died, and she just walked everywhere. She walked into town, which is about 1.5 miles away. It's very close, this little village called Narrowsburg, New York, in Sullivan County. So we had only known about Mildred and her stories through this old man that eventually died, and sadly, but we have kept those oral histories intact, and they're in the archive of the Mildred House. But later in our archaeological digs, we've uncovered, going through the local historical societies, that there was another family that lived there called the Lilly family, and started really learning more about who lived there in the 19th century. It was the Lilly family, and then they lived back even into the 18th century. And they got that homestead by warranty just after the Revolutionary War, as that's the way often the new government forming at that time was paying citizens who fought in the Revolutionary War with land. But that area was settled in the 1850s, and we're led to believe that the hearth and the ground is much older and probably there were people living there before that. I mean, white settlers before that, as there were skirmishes and fighting going on, as those white settlers moved west from Connecticut and then on. But this area is part of the oldest area of white settlement in Pennsylvania in the Northeast. Did I answer that question? Mildred, anyway, was just our first impact. And therefore we called it Mildred's Lane. Peabody, do you want to add anything to that?
You know, Mildred was just this really interesting, strong character. There are lots of stories about her. She was very vibrant. She, believed in UFOs and all sorts of crazy things, and thought the space shuttle was going to change the weather. Then, she lived alone. She, one of the ways she made income was she rented the land to one of the local hunting clubs, and they were very sad when we took over and didn't renew their lease. But when we arrived at the house, it was as if she had just left. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her calendar was on the wall. We saw the magazine she was interested in. She left a very big impact.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for explaining the origin of the name. And I'm reminded so much of like Mildred's Lane that she's traversing 4 times, and what you were saying earlier, Mark and David, about the driveway is like kind of an apt metaphor. That, it's not really that far, but by the time you reach the end of it, you've kind of prepared yourself. You've like done your trial by fire. You've emerged through the portal onto the other side. There's something really lovely about that. Thank you so much. Our next question is actually a comment coming from a digestion choreographer of years past, Athena Kokoranis.
Yeah.
Athena, you should be able to turn on your microphone now and share your pearls of wisdom.
Oh,
with us all.
what? From what? From the milk?
Digestion.
What part? So something as I grow older, and I first came to Mildred's Lane at 21, right out of undergrad, and I was a nanny. So early on, like so there's this component of family, and I was gonna get into the fungi and the woods, because like it's really fascinating as someone getting older and just thinking about like decomposition in many ways, and ecology, and like ways of protecting the land. And you should go visit Mildred's Lane and see this actual, like it's an experiment, and sometimes it fails, but it's actually protecting a lot of land in Pennsylvania. It's very practical, like, and I think as artists, like that's something that I'm holding right now in thinking about what Mildred's Lane has given me as a digestion choreographer, which is cooking for people's an appetite you can't cancel. So like tapping into appetite.
When I first came to Mildred's Lane, you were the digestion choreographer, and it was, I mean, these were not just meals, they were each, yes, their own little installation on the plate. It was amazing. Yeah. And now you have a business, right?
Well, there are dances, yes.
Yes,
there were dances, and everybody had to participate because we couldn't, but sometimes like, yeah, we had to have roles. And I have a domestic performance agency. I'm in New York right now, but it's an artist brand. It's a way to like, it's a way to insert art into the labor and like try to be an artist, a working artist. And right today, actually, I made this connection. So Mark Dion makes drawings every morning with blue and red pencils, accounting. And I just realized that I'm working with red right now. I'm working with red dye in the kitchen, and indigo, the blue. I have blue somewhere, but I'm just going on. But yeah, how do you make a living as an artist? These are my blueprints. But you should all go visit Mildred's Lane because it's very important. And Morgan's an incredible host. Hospitality, that's something you learn, and digestion choreography kind of.
Well,
There are no boundaries.
You know, I love you. You're like a daughter and a best friend and a colleague. And but Athena actually coined the phrase digestion choreographer. I just want to shout out to her for that. And really was one of the early titling of roles of the system of labors. And she was there for many years in many roles, in many capacities. And she's just recently there. Come again soon.
I'm eating the pie that you sent home with me. That's why I blackened. I was having lunch and I didn't want to like eat pie. I was hiding the pie. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you.
Thank you
An
all.
example of an extension of Mildred's Lane, the way David is an extension of Mildred's Lane, that who knows what your lives would be if you had not participated in Mildred's Lane, but that it goes out into the world, and it's beautiful.
That's a very important part of it too, which I'm not sure anyone mentions, all these different orbits around Mildred's Lane. And I think because I'm a kind of a neighbor, Barbara and I are neighbors to my wife, Barbara, to the south. And there's Nina and there's Amy, and there are a whole bunch of sort of Mildred's Lane tight family core that we're always around. We're always there. We don't go to everything, obviously. And we're kind of like the neighbors. And then there are these, all these different other orbits that are maybe people who've been there many, many times. And then there are people who've been there only once and they come back. So there's, Morgan knows how to kind of choreograph and juggle all these different groups and kind of pull them together. And I think that mix is an extremely important ingredient that I never really thought of before until this conversation. And I think it helps to make, I don't know, Morgan should chime in on this, but it sort of helps to perpetuate the commonality and the communality of this place without it ever being formalized. And I was thinking the other day too, like what makes a place like like Mildred's Lane not become a cult? What is the line where it's a free for all communal kind of situation, and then at the extreme end it becomes some scary kind of cult. And I think that's a huge part of it. This sort of, it's very porous, yet there are these elements that come and go and interweave constantly.
And Alastair, I would add to that we also have institutional allies too, right? We have associations with organizations like Elsewhere. We had associations with Cabinet Magazine, with Joanna Evanstein and Morbid Anatomy, and now with the Brooklyn Rail, that these are professional connections and a network of like-minded people who are in some way with a very different set of tools and a very different methodology, really kind of trying to do the same thing. So I think that's also part of that. We do have the people who've been through this program, and sort of Morgan is trained and developed and honed a lot of their emotional intelligence and their intellectual abilities, and they descend out to the world. But there are also all these other places where they can plug in, and they do plug in, and we have people from these other organizations also plugging in to Mildred's Lane.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. I think related to this topic, our next question will come from the lovely Anya Bernstein. Anya, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been such an exciting conversation, and this whole time I've been thinking of people I can send information about Mildred's Lane to, because I know so many others who would love to hear about this program. So thank you all for being here today. My question has to do with I'm wondering what your models for developing the philosophy of Mildred's Lane were. Like you've talked about Black Mountain College, and I'm hearing maybe some echoes of utopian socialism potentially. And I'm also interested in the quotes that were flashing throughout the conversation on the slideshow, the Karen Barad meeting the universe halfway, and the Deleuze quote. So I just love to hear you talk more on the philosophy a little bit. Thank you.
Well, I will just say that there's no concrete model, because so much about Mildred's Lane is experimentation. It's about pushing back against the models that exist or have existed in the art realm in the past. And I mean, in our world, it's about resisting, not in such an adolescent way as a young adolescent organization, but resisting the traditional or the given, but trying to come up with a new way forward. I mean, isn't that what we're all trying to do right now at this point on our earth, is we're trying to figure out a new way forward? I mean, I think we need each other to figure it out together. And so maybe it's not looking at models, but inventing new ones. And I always think about that. Well, how can we do this better? How can I get better at this task? You know, listen, it fails a lot. We experiment. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the personalities don't get along. Sometimes I rub against somebody. Sometimes they just resent me for being bossy, you know, whatever it is. It's still about having mutuality, a democracy of things, both human and non-human. It's about, you know, all of the contemporary theory that we're all reading right now, you know, from, you know, Donna Haraway, Bruno Latour, Gilles Deleuze, Isabel Stingers, or anybody relating to the environment in the future. It's about trying to get somewhere forward. And so it's practicing getting better at being on the planet. Does anybody want to add to that?
Well, that's fantastic.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Our next
Well,
question
I do
actually
think that, you know,
comes-
that question about the future is tricky because, you know, I mean, Mildred's Lane struggles, you know, it is not a, you know, it's not something that is self-sustaining. It takes an enormous amount of input, and you know, Morgan is the person who is inputting the most in every possible way. So you know, I mean, there's so much more we could do if we were just sustained, you know, and you know, and even at that level, you know, we just keep pushing ahead, but you know, we could do so much more if we had more resources and of all kinds. And you know, so when, you know, I think that it sounds very great and heroic, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that this is a real struggle to keep these doors open.
Maybe that's a good point.
Which might be
to-
where Malvika, we could, you know, the question you were thinking of ending our conversation with, which is, yes, how can we all help move Mildred's Lane into the future? What
Truly,
can we do?
I would love to actually get one more audience question.
Oh, sorry.
Is that okay? I know Madeline Charney has to leave shortly, and she asked such a brilliant and wild question, which I think will beautifully move us. So Madeline, if you're able to join, take it away. And if not, I can ask on your behalf. Hi.
So much creative energy behind every one of these boxes.
Yeah.
I wish I could hear everybody's wild dreams, but for our guests, like, what else is on the horizon? If you could do anything at Mildred's Lane, you know, what would it be? I know it's a big question to wrap up with.
Well, we're under a lot of strain right now because the county is pressuring us to stop doing what we're doing. Because I mean, you can imagine if you just suddenly opened up a whole project like this in your own home, which is what I've done, and the amount of people it attracts, there's inevitably going to be the governmental pressures that surround us pressing in. And also a lot of, you know, the way we're set up is kind of not entirely legal. So we have to fix it because of these pressures, these governmental pressures around me. And also the infrastructure. Next year is going to be our 25th anniversary, and I'm going to launch, with hopefully Peabody's help, a fundraising campaign to build a new building that actually is up to code. The main house at Mildred's Lane, if you have experienced it and want to experience it, you'll see that it's really a sculpture. I mean, there's a stairway in there, not a stair, it's a sculpture, and you have to come into it like that. The walls and the essence of the interior architecture is such an installation, and it's not worthy of serving food to the public. So in order to open more, we're closed now to the public right now, but we were basically shut down to the public during COVID, but also by the county. We have to figure out a way to have a legal kitchen that can serve the public, a legal space that can have more than 4 people in it at a time. Things like that, just in the landscape, opening up the walking path, the old horse trail that's 250 years old. We've been working on opening that to access River Road and getting down to town in a nice way. Fixing the road in there. I mean, not changing it, the essence of it, but fixing it. There are just so many things we need that unfortunately are economic issues. And hopefully we can figure out a creative way to raise funds to put forth, toward the legacy, toward the sustainability, toward the infrastructure of Mildred's Lane. It can't go on. I'm getting old. I might die.
One of those things that I think we want to move toward is really kind of getting back to where we were, where we could have, we had very large open social centers where people from the community would come, and those could be enormously successful. And
Yes,
you would
have been in
people
the
who wouldn't attend an exhibition in the local arts venues, but who would come to Mildred's Lane, and there would be food, and sometimes there would be music, and but this was all done below the radar, and things like that. Unfortunately, now we're sort of policed in a way where we were successful when we were under the radar, but now that people kind of know, so we have to figure out a way to do that again, to kind of get back to that point, because it was an important interface between artists who live in this community and other people from other fields. And we'd have people like the owners of the furniture store, and we'd have people who work in construction, and we'd have people who work in the timber industry coming to these things and mingling in a really productive and interesting way. So we got to figure out how to get back to that that kind of cross-pollination, which is what what we're really interested in the first place.
Good word, cross-pollination. Thank you for that. Yes.
But I guess one of the problems is also, the minute you start to get institutionalized to meet the standards of the county or whatever power that be that's bugging you, you're going to lose. You start to lose a lot of the quality that we all love about Mildred's Lane. I guess that's the big question for going forward in terms of, either annual fundraising or whatever it is, what kind of program you're going to set up to do a more consistent and, maybe legalize these otherwise illegal spaces. That line between legality and porosity and freedom that you've surfed for so long very effectively, you're going to lose some of that, or you're going to compromise some of that. But maybe there's a very creative way to join all that together.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. We'll never get a permit for a bonfire, and the bonfires that have happened at Mildred's Lane have been absolutely spectacular things on a scale that very few people can imagine materializing a bonfire like that. So, that's something we would never try to do that. But an important part of, I think we've all experienced a kind of death of urban subculture And so a big important thing about Mildred's Lane is that it's another kind of subculture coming from another kind of place. It's a kind of escape subculture, and we absolutely wouldn't want to sacrifice that.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I think that kind of rounds us right around back to exactly where Thyrza and I wanted to end the conversation, which is, you know, what are the asks? What do you need? What can each person in the Zoom presently do? And GE's question of, are there opportunities for volunteers? Are there, you know, particularly needed skills that you desire? Anything like that? Maybe to close us out, and then I'll pass the mic to the wonderful Fong Bui. But maybe Morgan, you know, particular asks, what can everyone do?
Yeah, we are. I just lost one of the dearest resident artists in complexity, as we call them. They usually are young creatives from all disciplines, not just art, who come to Mildred's Lane and spend about 9 months there, sometimes longer, and that can be ongoing for years and sometimes shorter, but who contribute to certain roles. For instance, the land steward. We just had an incredible couple, Joe Laro and Rachel Schmoker, who were there for the last 10 months, who completely transformed our garden, which we had been hacking at for several years. We kind of all lost momentum. I had a terrible accident on the lane and was very out physically for a few years, really. But they really transformed that part of the landscape. Others have, you know, worked on buildings, repairs, and their contributions are vast. But just lost a dear artist, Samiha Tasnem, who just did such a tremendous amount of work and just assisted me in every way. And so I'm taking applications for new resident artists in complexity who are hardworking. I mean, workaholic types, not thinking that you're going to come out here and get a studio. And, you know, it's really about being a part of the place and becoming an animal in the landscape like I am, you know, and just working alongside me in every aspect of existence there. It's not for the lighthearted, and you have to be able to rusticate. But we do need volunteers. Although I do an exchange where we feed and clothe and house, and also small stipends. It's actually a wonderful thing, and we've done it ever since we've been there. You know, and that's what how Athena started. Because when our son was young, we called them resident artists in complexities, but they also helped nanny our child and work on our projects with us. So it's complex. Yeah, we're looking for that, but we need money. Hate to say the big M word. So we really do need some new way of venturing into that world that really monetizes these organizations. So considering this ecosystem as an organization, I mean, we do need help financially.
Have you ever done a fundraising event in New York, in the city?
Well, everybody loves to think about that, but guess who has to do all that?
Yeah.
It's another job. I already have about a dozen jobs. And when people offer that idea up, you know, and people offer tons of ideas about, you can do this and this and that, but what they're doing is they're complicating my life even more. It's really something else that has, yes, we have done a few fundraisers over the years, but it ended up just being our friends buying each other's artwork. Famous one is the brown paper package fundraiser, where you don't know what you're getting inside if you're bidding on it. You know, you're just buying the artist in essence. It was lovely. We do need to do that again, but how?
I think just one thing to point out, or just to reiterate again on those points, just that Mildred's Lane is a place where that certainly has informed and expanded my notion of what inclusivity means, and is a place that there really kind of there really almost is something for everyone to find there that would be of interest to engage. Like there's not this a few sets of like subject matters that it's interested in. It is really kind of also a place that is about being interested, and a way to interface as many different kind of people and walks of life, literally all kinds of walks of life, around those kind of moments of inspiration, curiosity, investigation, and being. So I think that in terms of finding different routes, in terms of who supporters might be, there's so many different tendrils that it can come from, because it is a place that tends to open up engagement in that way.
Thank you all so much. This has been such a dynamic conversation, and I know we're really pressing up against time. We still have a beautiful poetry reading to move to. So for our final comments, it's my pleasure to pass the mic to Artistic Director and Captain of this fine ship, Phong H. Bui. Phong, take it away.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Thyrza. Hello, David.
Hello.
Hi, Phong.
Hi, Morgan. Hi,
Hello.
Mark.
Hi, Phong.
Hi, Alastair,
Hi,
Barbara.
Phong.
Hi, Charlie.
Yeah, everybody's here. Everybody, we actually having a lunch with our two great artist friends.
Oh my gosh.
Guys,
Federico Soni.
hey, there's a great conversation.
And also our new managing director over there, Ellen Robinson. So what can I say? I spent time at Mildred Lane, was blown away by the commitment, by its philosophy, and it reminded me so much of the tradition of how we learn to admire, how to the community of various disciplines that can be mobilized, whether Bloomsbury, or even just recently, I've been rereading John Dewey, who have a serious effect of how Black Mountain College came to its being, where professor, teacher, poet, writer, dancer, theater director, even the great Bucky Fuller came and became part of the mix. And everyone was sort of learning how to mediate, communicate to one another. And what survived in the end is the community as a concept. It's a sociological concept, always very powerful, because it allows people to cross-pollinate, to share. So if Morgan is not a most adequate fundraiser to keep Mildred Lane going, some of us have to step in and help and support. And I'm not the greatest one, but I think I'm beginning to understand what it means. And so the rail is going to collaborate with Mildred Lane 100%. And I'm at your disposal before I get sent back on the boat and put back in the labor camp Vietnam. Mark is laughing. But we are behind you guys 100%. And we're going to work together. Yeah. Deeply appreciate what you guys do. And that's what we need to do. I always love this, this African proverb that say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go together, go slow. That's what we do. So the fact that however long you've been around, however long the rail's been around, the congenial of commitment and the spirit and everything in between, which is the love for art and culture, is deeply serious, and it's what is charged our battery. And then we are here to make a serious leap together. So for that, in solidarity, love and courage. Hello.
Yes.
Relay. Woo. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you, Phong.
Thank you.
Thank
Hold
you,
up.
Phong.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Phong, love that so much. Makes me think as well of the Desmond Tutu, people are people through other people, that kind of cultural generosity, which is so clearly present in this Zoom and at Mildred's Lane. It's our tradition at the Rail to close out all of our events with a poetry reading, and today I'm so excited to be welcoming poet and writer Patrycja Humienik to the Zoom stage. Daughter of Polish immigrants, Patrycja is a writer and performer based in Seattle. She serves as events director for the Seventh Wave and works in the Office of Equity and Justice in graduate programs at the University of Washington. She was a recent semifinalist for the 92Y Discovery Prize, very nice, and is at work on her first book of poems, Anchor Baby. Everyone give it up for Patrycja, and Patrycja, take it away.
There we go. Needed you to unmute me. Thank you. I'm so
Hi.
grateful to be a part of this. It's been such a rich, generous conversation. And I love the ways that I love learning more about Mildred's Lane and the way that you all are reimagining radical places of belonging and making and entanglement. For me, art is all about relationships, and it's beautiful to be in a space that with people who are valuing that and questioning also our relationship to land. I hope to get to experience it one day, so it's on my radar, and thank you for that beautiful talk. I'll just share a couple of poems with you from that in progress first book that Malvika mentioned called Anchor Baby, which is grappling with some ideas of belonging and inheritance and devotion and illusions of stability in our era. So I will kick it off with a newer poem. Thank you again so much for having me. There's what I think and what I feel, and I don't always know which is mine. Cheek pressed against wood once alive. When I see the cross on the hill near Pilgrimage Bridge, part of me is kneeling inside. I can't turn away fast enough. Someone else's dreams were stitched to this connective tissue before I could give permission. Glia of inherited longings makes my nervous system the closest thing to family I don't have photos of. Fragments linger in my philtrum, little valley. Psalms trying to find a place to rest. The bear that shattered the glass door in my dream brought a message. Something about quiet. My weather app says a nearby river is flooding, brings to surface another dream. Flooded gymnasium of floating shoes, people wringing out hats, shin deep in cloudy water with a troubling lack of urgency. I was standing in the water too, willing my feet to dry. The next poem is called On Devotion. Not the splendor of the dead king's baths, but the peacocks demanding devotion. Is it devotion to pour a glass of water for your lover? Alone in the back of a candlelit mass in English, not the vaulted frescoes of my childhood basilica, mumbled prayers in Polish, lit a candle for my mother's parents who I never met. I had questions for God. Do you renounce imperialism? Winters ago on the phone, a friend saying, jealousy is good because it is a form of protection. But what if protection is a form of harm? Winter again, snowed in, my lover shoveling flake after flake out my mouth and into the slush pile, a pathway out to where the roads are closed. That it rarely snows where I now live delights and disturbs me, e.g. kiwis ripening in early December. The Midwestern Polish priest, a family friend, sends vaccine conspiracy theory videos via WhatsApp. Along the fence, strung lights remind me of snow where white camellias grow instead. That I want to see every body of water, lava, lands I don't know the name for, the Red Sea. Isn't it enough to have seen flamingos pink with feeding in the salt flats in the driest desert in the world? Sometimes I think of God while washing my feet. I think of where I have not walked, my longing to go further. And my last poem for you is called Floodplain. It isn't that the flood rids us of memory. No, it shapes memory. Like dough, cracks our knuckles. Across the Atlantic, my aunts and uncles rise early for the blessing later. Anoint tired, thirsty skin with oil after a day's work. That's elegance to me. Drought or torrent, someone works the land. Along the Pacific, someone picks fruit I know the name of. Don't you ever wish to stay in bed for days? Touch a deluge, eroding structure, toppling every monument. Capacity for violence held. To try to contain anything is to rid it of water. Admit that the water is rising. Thank you.
Wonderful.
God, my goodness. Thank you so much, Patrycja, comrade of verse, as we will call you from now on. I love that line. I had questions for God. Do you renounce imperialism? And thank you to all of you here in the audience, in the chat. Thank you, Ambassador of Entanglement, Morgan. Thank you, Cabinet Minister of Peregrination, Peabody, aka Mark Dion, David Brooks, you creature of the pond waters, and others. Thank you to the Fugitive in Archives doing the necessary and vital work, Alastair Gordon, and to Barbara, Barbs, Bourland, and to Thyrza. Just so vital and so special. I'm so moved by this culture of generosity, which we've heard so much about and now experiencing. Just thank you all deeply. A few last things. So we'll be uploading this recording of the conversation to our event archives online, as well as to YouTube. So it'll be available in a few days if ever you'd like to revisit this vital space. Important to note, you can revisit or visit this vital space in person through support, donations, getting involved, volunteering your labor, material support, things like that, to Mildred's Lane and all the vital community work happening there. So I've dropped a couple links in the chat, but really do smash that donation link. If you identify as an animal in the landscape, as Morgan does, drop an application in the link in the chat as well. Really, really important that we sort of safeguard and shore up and preserve these vital spaces. And lastly, we do this every day here at The Rail, so please join us again tomorrow when we're joined by artist Elliot Hunley in conversation with curator and artist Andrew Woolbright, who also has a past of creating intentional communities. They'll be in conversation on Elliot Hunley Balcony, an exhibition on view at Casimir Gallery through October 23rd. And we'll be closing with a poetry reading by Catherine Fatima, who joins us from across the border in Canada. That will be, as always, at 1 p.m. Eastern, right here in the Zoom. Other than that, thank you all so much, and I'll invite you to turn on your microphones if you'd like to say hello to one another, goodbye on your way out, or anything else that compels you. But really, thank you so much. This has been so fantastic. I don't want to leave.
Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank
Well
you.
done, team. Thanks.
Thank you.
There.
Hi, Thyrza. Nice to see you today.
Nice to see you. Oh, look at you all.
Woo! Welcome!
Thank you, Thyrza. It was fantastic. Thank you.